You're listening to a Whales Are Whales production.
You're also listening to Whales.
Visit whalesorewhales.com for more projects and shows like this one.
Greetings.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of Hearthaholics Strategies of Hearthstone. This week, we're going to be talking about card review and evaluation. And joining me for that is Andres. Hey, Andres, how you doing?
Hey, Brian. I'm doing great today. Got my webcam going, so for the first time ever, we got live video over here. Well, you guys can't see it, but we can see it.
You guys can't see it, but we totally can. So, you know, we're gonna do lots of visual humor the whole time. We're gonna do half the episode in sign language. So this is, it's gonna go great.
But, you know, this is baby steps for maybe in the future, you know, being a little more video featured and stuff. You know, we started in the audio world, but we're not against video. We don't hate it.
No, not at all. It's just we haven't had to do it yet, but it's something we might look into. Something exciting about this episode and this week is that we had been planning to do a card review episode anyway, because we thought it would be a really interesting thing to talk about, the idea of when new cards come out, how can you evaluate a card? How can you tell if it's good? What are different evaluation methods people have used in Hearthstone and Magic? And then we're like, well, around BlizzCon will be good because they'll probably announce something. What we didn't expect was them to announce and release something within a week, which fit pretty darn well. So now we're actually doing a 2-part thing this week. We're going to have this episode about how we review cards and good practices. And then we're actually going to have a full set review of the expansion, League of Explorers. That's what it's called, right?
That's right. Let's talk about that for a second, though. What do you think about that announcement when they were like, all right, well, the adventure is going to come out sometime next month? No. You know what? It's going to come out next week. You know what? It's going to come out Thursday. And everyone lost their mind.
I love it because they figured out a place in Hearthstone where already when they were like GVG is coming out in a month or two, people were crazy because Blizzard never does that.
Yeah.
But now that they're to the point with Hearthstone that they can keep it a secret long enough and work on enough stuff to be able to release stuff the next week, I think that's going to do a lot to keep the game fresh.
Also, you think it was a little strategy maybe to diffuse like some of the stuff that has been going on?
People were really angry for a while. That's a good thought. And also, I think it allows them, sometimes like the build-up period was too long. Like I think before TGT, there was almost like too much time to speculate and people just look at the cards. I kind of like this immediate, especially with an adventure that takes 5 weeks to roll out, or 4 weeks in this case.
I am totally okay with this release schedule. If from now on, every time they announce an adventure is for the next week, I am on board with that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good plan. Maybe for full expansions, give it a couple weeks since there are, hundreds of cards coming out with that. But
please, let's never go back to the Naxxrama's release one card for a week for 2 months.
That was too much. I think they realized that was drawing it out a little too long. So, and plus, so that makes 3 expansions they released this year. No one is expecting, I don't think, that kind of release cycle, because we had BlackRock, we had the Grand Tournament, and we had League of Explorers. So they're setting a new precedent.
I feel like so far they've nailed the cycle, because every time it starts feeling a little too stale, bam, new cards come out.
Maybe they actually, when they first designed Hearthstone, had 5 expansions done, and they're just like, we'll just release these, when the game's getting boring.
Well, they've talked about that. Sometimes when they interview them once an expansion is out, they're like, well, I worked on that a year ago. So they've probably worked on another, at least 2 more after that one, I would believe.
Yeah. I wonder how much they then tweak them to address current metagame, because stuff happens and must happen between when they come up with a card concept and when it actually comes out, Patron becomes a deck between those two things. So they probably have to,
I'm sure they can have a level of predictability.
Right.
And then they know at least what is likely to come out.
Yeah.
And then the only thing they have left to know is how is this gonna be insane? Is this gonna be too much? Is this gonna take over everything? Or is this gonna be kind of in fine tune with everything else and we can kind of leave it alone?
I still remember on the Angry Chicken when Ben Brode was talking about Mysterious Challenger, he knew before it came out and as it was coming out, that Mysterious Challenger was going to be a powerful card. He's like, we looked at previous effects. We know how this stuff works, and this is going to be big for Hearthstone. And I don't think a lot of other people were quite expecting it to that level.
Yeah, definitely.
I think they predicted Secret Paladin in a way they didn't predict Patron.
Well, I think they made Secret Paladin.
Yeah.
I think they already had that idea in mind, and then they were like, okay, what card can we make to make this deck viable? And
right.
Mysterious Challenger was what they came up with. I was like, yeah, that's good enough.
So yeah, League of Explorers, I've been enjoying it. Just the first wing's out as of today, actually. Yesterday for the people listening to this. And yeah, it was fun. Like, the normal versions of the bosses never engage me that much, just because you can beat them with pretty much any deck, given 1 or 2 tries. But they're getting really creative. I thought the whole Escape from the Temple was a really fun idea.
I really enjoyed that one, actually, now that you mentioned it. Yeah, the adventure in general just seemed really fun. I had a lot of fun completing it, from the little voiceover to all the little mechanics that are involved in it. All the decks are also pretty cool. I really like these bosses, the way they designed them, because rather than make him extremely challenging and hard to beat, they make him very accessible, and they use them more as a display, I feel, because they exemplify a lot of the mechanics and the new stuff that is gonna come with this with these bosses, especially with the class challenges. They really try to emphasize like some of this new core mechanics and stuff. Like I can't remember. The genie one had all Discover all over the place, and that was super interesting. Like, getting to see how you can use that strategically. Like, sometimes maybe not using it immediately, but maybe waiting the board to develop a little bit, and then using it and choosing the appropriate answer. I thought it was actually really cool and it had a lot of strategic depth. I really enjoyed it.
I agree with you. I think they did a really good way of, using their time to be able to show that stuff off, especially with Discover, where, starting out, there are only going to be like 1 or 2 Discover cards. So you're going to be lucky to be able to discover like once or twice during a game, giving you a chance where you can just discover over and over again and really get a feel for the numbers game and that, and how often you're getting good cards from it is really smart.
Like, obviously it was overdone. And in a way, they also made it a little bit of a challenge, because you would find like your hand would start to fill up. And you're like, oh god, I'm gonna overfill. So now I gotta think about like, how do I deploy this cards fast enough? Do I use this Discover now? Also, the one that gave you more wishes. It was kind of like,
I love that the
like,
design of that. Just wish for more wishes.
But then, like, my hand is so big. What do I do with all this? I can't play all this,
Yeah. I really look forward to getting more into the Discover mechanic in our set review episode. But one thing I will say off the bat that I love about it is it's giving you the fun of random with the strategy of actual choice. And I think that's an amazing combination, because it's randomized to 3 you get to choose from. It's not just drawing from your deck, but you get to... And for people who don't know, in case you haven't looked up Discover, I should probably explain. Basically, if something has a Discover effect, it's going to say, like, discover a minion. And that means it'll randomly choose from 3 minions, either from your class minions or all neutral minions, and pop them up just like something like tracking, and then you get to choose one of those 3 to put in your hand. And the reason I like that so much is it has the random thing of like, oh my gosh, this could be any minion. It could be Gazrilla if I'm Hunter, or it could be, Lepronome. It could be anything. But you also get a choice. So it's not just like Unstable Portal. It's like, this is what you get.
Yeah, it's actually a controlled choice. I was playing the class challenge, and this was a very cool experiment, and I was so glad that it worked out, because it felt great. You were playing like the Bolster Warrior in that class challenge, and I had 3 minions on the board, and I had 2 bolsters, which was enough to get him low enough, but not to kill him. And I was like, I had 2 Discover spells, and I was like, you know what? I bet I can find a 3rd bolster with this. I played the first Discover, couldn't do it. Played the second one, and there it was.
I found one as well.
Yeah, bolster. I was like, oh, come over here, baby. 3 bolsters in 1 turn, and that was insane.
I did something similar. I just also really appreciate that they put a bolster deck in there for me to use, because I've been wanting to play that since bolster came out.
I think it's becoming a thing, We'll talk about that later when we get into the new cards that are coming out. But I think bolster decks and Taunt Warriors are coming up, boys.
We hoped last time, but sometimes they just need that last little push.
Yeah,
over the edge.
it's like dragons, they just need.
You're right. Everyone said
edge.
A little bit more. All right, so speaking of reviewing cards, let's get into our episode topic this week, which is rather than reviewing the cards in specific, we're going to go over some guidelines and ideas about good ways to review cards in general, so you can kind of know where we're coming from. And hopefully be able to evaluate cards better yourself going forward.
Sure. Yeah, like you said, we're gonna be doing this little. It's gonna be a little shorter episode, hopefully, and we're just gonna talk about how to judge cards in general, how to have a unbiased opinion about them, and how to maybe spot potential cards before they come out, and you can make your own informed decisions about new cards coming out. I think going forward, this is a good little guide to have.
Yeah, we just want to have the standard set. So if there's ever a card review episode, we can say, do you guys want to know how and why we're thinking about it this way? Go listen to this episode, and it's just going to be a quick summary of how we go about reviewing cards. There are, of course, other ways that we're not going to mention here. But this is a lot of ways that people like to review cards, and the main ones that we use. So.
Yeah, and of course, after this episode, stay tuned for card review. We'll be releasing them simultaneously. Mm-hmm. We'll be going over all of the cards, but it would be too long of an episode to do both of them together. So if you don't actually want to listen to how to review cards and how to judge cards, you're already an expert at that. You can skip this and go into our opinions about the cards in the next segment.
Yep. So the first important thing to note about card reviewing is the idea of formats. And we talked about formats actually extensively last week. But that's the idea of, Arena is one format, Ranked is another format, Tavern Brawl is another format, and then tournaments are the fourth most important
tournaments.
format.
And depending on what kind of tournament, right? Like tournaments can have their own format. Like the most common one is Conquest, is the officially sanctioned one. But there can be a lot of other ones like Challenge Stone or a lot of the fun ESL series, a lot of those.
Exactly. And a card that's good in Arena could be terrible in Ranked. A card that's good in 1 week's Tavern Brawl could be terrible in the next week's Tavern Brawl. So when you're reviewing a card, it's important to say, what are you reviewing it for? Because it's not going to just be the same thing across every format.
Absolutely. A card's power level is entirely dependent on the rules that govern, what you're playing around. We see this changing all of the time. It's easy to see in things like, Tavern Brawls, where every week cards are a good change a lot. And this is depending on the rules that we have.
Exactly. We, for our part, in our card reviews going forward, at least for now, are going to focus on ranked reviews only. At some point, if we get really into Arena, maybe we'll also do Arena episodes or something, but we don't want to take too general of an approach because most of what we play is constructed, ranked in some tournaments. And that's what we would be most interested in and knowledgeable about reviewing. So that's really going to be our focus in our episodes, is talking about how these cards do in constructed decks rather than Arena or Tavern Brawl or anything like that. But there are lots of great resources to find good Arena cards out there. So,
yep.
Let's jump into some of the basic evaluations people use, or the best ways to evaluate a card. One of those is pretty simple. It's the baseline stats of the card. This is also known as the vanilla test. This is just the idea of, you look at how much attack it has, you look how much power it has, you look how much it costs. Is it a good deal based on, what cards are average?
It's basically like the most raw way at which you can look at a card. And you're usually looking, at minions to see if you're getting good bang for your buck. Is this good enough stats? Am I paying this much amount of mana for a good enough of a return? If it's spells, is it a powerful enough effect to be worth this much mana? And generally, there are guidelines for this in Hearthstone. This has come to be known over time, right? And just from looking at the cards, you can get a general sense of this. And basically, you just find the average of what's a good card. So, for example, on the 1 mana slot, you can count on it being at least a 2/1, right?
Yeah.
You have that's the average of a good card in 1 mana slot. You obviously have outliers like Zombie Chow, which is great, but we'll go into that later. But you're just looking at cards like, can I at least get this much? For 2 mana, you usually get a 3/2 or a 2/3. For 3 mana, generally the new consensus is that a 3/4 is generally what's good.
Yeah, that changed over expansions, but it became the new standard, really.
Yeah, it's really the new standard. And then for 4 mana, so 4/5, which makes sense, right? Like for the longest time, we had a 4/5 be the standard for 4 mana, but for 3 mana it was only a 3/3, right?
Yeah, 3 mana was rough for a while. It was hard to get something above a 3/3 in a 3 slot, and it felt really odd with it having such a power jump between 3 mana and 4 mana. So they kind of evened that out with expansions, which is one reason new 3 mana cards are often used so much. Mm-hmm. Or you're typically slotting like spells in for it.
But yeah, basically this is what we call a baseline evaluation, or like you said, the vanilla test. Everybody knows this one. When you get a card, does it pass this test?
Exactly. And typically if it's lower or it's higher, like say you're paying 2 mana and you're getting a 4/5, or you're paying 1 mana and getting a 2/3, there's probably something in the ability that's telling you why. Similarly, if you're paying too much, like you're paying 3 mana for a 1/4, there's going to be some ability that trades that off, which brings us to the second part, which is the idea of baseline abilities. And the idea of how good the ability on the card is and how much that ability would cost roughly in mana. So let's go through some of those examples of you have a 2 mana card, it's a 4/5, that's Ancient Watcher. That seems like an incredibly good deal on the vanilla test because as we went before, that should be worth 4 mana, but its ability is can't attack. And in Hearthstone, that basically means unless you do something to that card, it literally is useless. So however much you want to cost the mana for that, reducing it, you can. Some effects are global enough across the game that you can start to get a sense for how much mana they're worth. For example, card draw. Card draw is used on so many cards that you can start to get an idea for how much mana the game really values card draw at. For example, Arcane Intellect, which draws you 2 cards, costs 3 mana. A 1/1 creature, what's that creature called? The little gnome. Novice Engineer.
The Novice Engineer for 2 mana?
Is a 2 mana 1/1. A 1/1 though is typically like a 0 cost creature of stats. So
yeah, you get a Wisp. They give you a 1/1 for free.
Right. So you're valuing the card draw at about 2 mana. So card draw is about 1.5 to 2 mana per card. It differs a little bit, but if you look at Sprint, it also falls into that. 7 mana for 4 cards is about 1.5 to 2 mana per card. So as you start to look at cards and look at their abilities, sometimes you can start to realize about what the baseline mana level is for an ability. Another example of that would be like points of damage on a spell falls between 0.5 and 1 mana. So like a 1 mana spell typically does 2 damage and ranking up from there. So it's a pretty helpful way of being able to say, okay, look at the card's baseline stats, then combine it with the card's abilities, and you can start to get an idea for how much that card is worth.
Yeah, and this is a good way to look at new cards and also to look at cards while you're, for example, drafting arenas or that sort of thing.
It's amazing for Limited. Because in Arena and Limited, you're not looking so much at synergy and expecting a deck to be able to be built around the card. So the pure power of the card in isolation, its ability and its stats together is really what you're looking for.
Exactly.
Because you can't count on those other surrounding elements being around it.
Yep. So this is just looking at the specific card. How much value can you get from it? And you kind of have like a general sense for what's the average. If you're getting more than that, then great, definitely go for it. If you're getting less than that, you better have a really good reason to be picking that card.
Exactly. Another thing that's going beyond just the strength of the card itself, or its core strength, and going to what the card can potentially do. A really important way to determine kind of the potential strength of card is just looking at the card potential. And that's the idea of what can this card do in a best case scenario. That's something that's helpful to look at because some cards are variable. It's not just like, I play it, it's a 4/5, it's a Yeti, it's always going to be a 4/5 Yeti. Some of them become much better depending on what's going on in the game. A great example of that is Mysterious Challenger. If the best case scenario with that card is you're on turn 5, you have a coin, you play it on turn 5, you have 5 secrets in your deck, they all come out at once, you've just got 5 secrets, a 6 attack, 6 health creature, you thinned your deck from all of those secrets, and you did that all with 1 card. That's incredible amounts of value.
Exactly.
You're always going,
and you also, when you also compare it to, the baseline stats and the baseline abilities that other cards in that range have, you can see that Mysterious Challenger exceeds that kind of thing when you meet those conditions.
Exactly. And it's important to do this, not just to understand how good a card is, but to understand that, let's take Wisp. Best case scenario, you play it with the 1 drop on turn 1 and get an extra 1/1 for a card. Even in its best case scenario, it's not good. That's assuming you have it in your opening hand. So if you look at a card and the card's best case scenario still isn't something you want in your deck, then you can pretty much just automatically write that card off because you've thought of there's no potential left for it to reach. So that can be a helpful way of you saying, if this card even reached its best case, would it still be worthwhile to be in my deck? The important next step to take, though, is once you realize what that best, let's say Mysterious Challenger again, once you realize how good that scenario is, a really important thing to then think through is how likely is that scenario?
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to get in the thinking of, it's going to go my way. This card's amazing because it can be great. So obviously this card is always great. And that's a very damaging mindset to get into. You really have to think about what is the actual likelihood of me being able to pull off this card's win condition. Great example of that is Memoron's Head. That's a card that I think you have to have 4 mechs in play at the start of your turn.
I think is 3 mechs.
Is it 3?
I think it's 3 mechs. And
Okay.
Memoron counts as 1.
Gotcha.
But
So
even that is very hard to pull off.
Right. So it's a card like that where sure, its best case scenario is potentially game winning, but the chance of getting 3 mechs in play at the beginning of your next turn, giving your opponent a whole turn to react.
Once
so
your
low.
opponent knows that you have played Memoron's Head too.
Right. Exactly. That it's, it's extremely unlikely. So that best case scenario you then needs to balance with like, how likely is it I can get that? And that's why cards like Dr. Boom are so amazing because they have a best case scenario that you can guarantee really often. So the cards that both have a best case scenario and also allow you to reach that best case scenario often are the ones you really are going to look at as major bombs.
And it's important to note, sometimes thinking about the best case scenario and the likelihood of the best case scenario is not super easy, especially with new cards. Sometimes it actually requires quite a bit of playtesting because you can even try it out 1 or 2 times and really not pull it off and feel like it's terrible. But maybe you just got hit by variance and just had a really unlucky hands or something. But if you tried it 20 times, you start realizing, oh, okay, I can use this way and this way, and you start seeing the potential develop a little more. Some other cards can be a little more obvious in the actual potential. A good example of this is Piloted Shredder.
Yeah, people knew that was going to be good.
Exactly. You get a 4/3, and people could make the average of what would come out, right? You get a 2-drop from it, so people could make a list of all of the 2-drops, get the average stats, and they found out that at least you get, I think it's a 3/2 or a 2/3.
Yeah, either way, that's 7/5 of stats for 4 mana.
Yeah, exactly. Which
that's
exceeds anything you can play for 4 mana already. And then sometimes, very sometimes, you can have very bad outcomes, but the chances are so low that you almost have to neglect them and then just play around them when they happen. Yeah. But most of the time, the outcome is very good. So, the cards like that are a little easier to judge, but it's a good example to think about.
That's a really good point, and something that we definitely try to make an effort to do is when there is a more complex card like Varian Wrin or Mysterious Challenger, I really don't like to take a firm opinion on that kind of card before it's out and can get a lot of play testing because it's very easy to be wrong about those. Like, we'll definitely have opinions about them and say what we think, but you have to keep in mind that when they're actually play tested and implemented in the game, people find out very different things about them. And I think they're the cards that people are often the most wrong about. Stuff like Grim Patron or Varian Wrin. People thought Varian would be amazing. People thought Grim Patron wouldn't really do anything.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it's once people can actually play test and integrate those cards and see, because we know the scenario can be awesome, but all of the variables of how likely they'll actually be pulled off and how often they'll be countered by all the different decks in the game really take time and effort for people to start tweaking them to see how they're going to turn out.
Yeah,
so.
Grim Patron is the best example of that because everybody thought that card was going to be so underwhelming and that the conditions to make that card good were so hard to meet at a 5 cost. But they didn't realize that with Warzone Commander, things like Whirlwind and Deathspite, which already has a Whirlwind integrated into that, and it's already an amazing card. The conditions to make Grim Patron an amazing card are actually easier to meet than you would think.
Exactly. So that's definitely something to keep in mind of card potential. Why don't you talk a little, Andres, about the idea of card history and comparing cards to previous cards?
Yeah, another way to gauge the potential of new cards that are coming out is taking a look at cards that have previously come out in older expansions or have been in the game for a while. This can help us with cards that have similar effects and they're kind of like in the same vein because we can already have a general idea for how powerful those effects are. A good example of this is, for example, Frostbolt with Dark Bomb when it came out, and later on with Quickshot, all these 3 cards have very similar effects, and we already knew that Frostbolt was a very good card. The 3 damage paired up with the freeze is actually pretty amazing as removal. Obviously, Dark Bomb didn't have the freeze, but if we think about Frostbolt, most of the time we're using it to outright remove a creature, where the freeze sometimes becomes negligible and it's almost like the cherry on top of the pie. Dark Bomb does kind of like the same job, and Quick Shot does the same job too, with the upside that if your hand is empty, which happens a lot as a hunter, you get an extra free card, which is, great. So it was kind of easier to judge the power level of things like Dark Bomb and Quick Shot before they came out, because we already had a point of reference. This happens all the time too. With this expansion, there's already a few cards that already resemble previous cards, and we can have a general idea for how good they will be compared to the ones we already have.
Exactly. Yeah. And a good thing to think through is think through first, how are these cards similar? What's the best baseline card history I can get to it? And then how is this different? Like in Dark Bomb's case, like, okay, so it doesn't have the freezing effect. That's one difference. And the second difference is it's in Warlock instead of Mage. So you think through all the reasons, like, why would it be good in Mage and not in Warlock? Well, they have things that combo with spells. And so you think through all of the reasons that, like, first you think through the similarities and then think through the differences. And maybe the meta is different than when that card is being played, and it's not going to be so good against the current meta.
You can also think about, can Warlock benefit from an effect like this? Or
exactly,
do they really don't need it?
Exactly. What decks does Warlock run? Are those going to need it like Tempo Mage does? So, like, first you create the similarities, and then you start realizing what the differences are, and that might come up as the differences are enough to make this card different from the one before. It might come up as, the old one is good / bad. This one probably will be as well. And that's going to be something we're going to be doing a lot, is referencing old cards, because, as we said in our last point, extensive playtesting is the best way to understand a card. So if you have a shortcut to be able to use that extensive playtesting and inform your future opinions, that gives you way greater likelihood to be correct about your opinions.
Couldn't have said it better.
So let's move on to format-specific strengths. We talked about this before starting out, but basically it's that idea of, depending on what format you're playing, the cards are going to be better in certain ones. An example we have here is Emperor Thaurissan or Lotheb. They're really powerful cards, but they're typically more powerful at countering specific strategies. While in Arena, you're not worried so much about a combo killing you and using Lotheb to stop Savage Roar and Force of Nature. You're mostly just concerned with, playing the best stats you possibly can on the right turns.
Exactly. Or, for example, if in a Tyrant Brawl is a good example. Lotheb or Emperor Thaurissan might not fit at all, because maybe the Tyrant Brawl is all about spells or this sort of thing. But, But basically, we have to think about the format specifically. Like, if we're thinking about ranked, then we have to think about what decks are gonna excel in that sort of environment, and what cards are kind of gonna fall short. Some cards might be amazing in the in the abilities that they have, but when you put them in contrast with the format, for example, ranked, then you might think to yourself, well, this card is just too slow. It would never make it in rank because I would probably be dead by the time I'm trying to pull off this effect. Or in contrast, you can also be like, well, this card seems really cool, but compared to the cards I'm going to face in ranked against my opponents, it's probably going to fall short to the same cards in the same mana cost that I'm playing.
Yeah, exactly. It's also important to remember, one of the most important things you can predict is if you can find the card that's going to determine the meta, then you can start basing other cards based on that. For example, if you could have called the Secret Paladin, sometimes cards don't have to play by the meta, sometimes they shape it, like Secret Paladin made that mid-range deck way more powerful in the meta. So if you can realize that really early on and then start weighing other cards based on that, then you're really going to have a look ahead, but it's very difficult to do that.
Yeah.
All right. Archetype-specific cards is another important thing. And as we were talking about with control, mid-range, aggro, this is a nice broad way without getting into specific deck lists of saying, like, what kind of strategy does this card work for? Zombie Chow is a great example. It's a one-cost minion that when it dies, it heals the opponent 5. You don't want that in an aggro deck because you might get a little bit of extra damage and board control at the gate, but you're losing whatever damage you get through the first few turns to that heal effect. However, in a control deck, you can play it turn 1, control the creatures from an aggro deck, and the healing doesn't even matter because you probably aren't even attacking the other person's face those first few turns.
Yeah, I love the card design of Zombie Chow.
It's amazing.
Because Zombie Chow is a minion that aggro decks would drool over. They're like, please, I want this kind of minion to be able to play it on turn one.
Mm-hmm.
But it's untouchable by them because that death rattle, that heal 5 to your opponent, just destroys the whole idea of aggro and killing your opponent fast. But for control decks, this card just fits in perfectly and helps stop the aggression. So it's a great example of a card that is very archetype specific, in which in one archetype it falls short quite badly, and then in the other one it excels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something important to remember, is that these cards aren't being spit out by a random number generator. Like, people are designing these cards, and sure, sometimes they just design bad cards or cards to fill a role. But if you think about, like, what is this card intended for? That can sometimes give you a big clue to, like, what it can be used for. Like, are they trying to put this in a control deck? Are they trying to put it in a mid-range deck? And you'll start to realize that most cards, even ones that seem confusing at first, have somewhere that they fit into the game at some point, or some specific way to play
Green
them.
Patron is a good example of it too. Like, instantly you can see that classes like Warrior or Mage can take advantage of it a lot more than classes like Priest, which has no 1 mana damage to their minions, and their hero power definitely has nothing to do with damage. so some cards definitely naturally fit better into certain archetypes, and it's important to keep a lookout for that. Being familiar with certain archetypes definitely will help with that. Like when Darnassus Aspirant came out, people who played Druid instantly were like, yes, this is all I've ever wanted for this deck.
Exactly. So that's one of the key things. You can get a little bit more in depth by doing deck specific cards, which is beyond just saying what archetype does this card fit in. It's like, what specific deck existing in the meta right now does this fit into? It's definitely more specific. It's also something that is less timeless than the other things, because certain decks might just stop existing over time, in which case, you're going to need to reevaluate that card. But that said, it's incredibly important. We've talked about Grim Patron. We've talked about Mysterious Challenger. These are cards that wouldn't really exist if not for the decks you could build around them. If Paladin didn't have secrets, Mysterious Challenger would be horrible. And Paladin didn't, create a deck full of secrets.
Yeah,
so
and these cards are interesting, the deck-specific ones, because normally Blizzard does do a pretty good job of keeping an eye out for what people kind of want to see in the game and what decks they want to kind of promote.
Right.
And you can see deck-specific cards being released all the time. Like back in the day when Warlock didn't play with their demons, they were like, we want to fix that. So they released Void Color as a way to be like, no, we want this card to be specifically being played in demon decks. Or I don't know, there's a million examples of this type of thing that they've included.
Yeah, Naxxramas had a lot of, as the first expansion of Hearthstone, I think it had a lot of ways to make people think differently about the game. I still think if you want to do a little test, evaluating of cards for an expansion, going back to the Naxxramas cards are wonderful ones to examine, because they were all really specifically crafted. With a lot of interesting effects. It actually had a big impact on the game. Loatheb, Zombie Chest, Sludge Belcher, the one you just, Void Collar. Those are all ones that are really interesting to look back on how they changed
Some
the
of
game.
them are more general, but Void Collar was very specific. Or cards like Totem Golem, or you can think about the dragons. Wormwraith Agent. That was probably their way of saying Priest is gonna have dragons.
Yes. And it did. Let the dragons be born. That and the Twilight Guardian. So you got some great stuff there.
Yeah.
And that's about all for the general rules. Again, listen to our card review episode, and you'll hear us bring these points back up over again. And you'll get a feel for kind of how they apply to actually.
Yeah, these are very general points on how to view cards, especially when they're coming out. These are general ways that you can think about them to kind of try to get a sense for how good or how bad they're gonna be.
And the last thing I wanted to go over is a concept that kind of helps you visualize cards in a different way and have a kind of a new test to put them through, which is quadrant theory. And this is a theory that was primarily created for Magic, actually, and works primarily in a limited or arena format. It's because it really analyzes how the card affects the game kind of in a vacuum. It doesn't really focus very much on the combo potential of the card, but it does focus on where the card works at different parts of the game, or different places in the game you could be. For example, it splits the game up into 4 segments. One is you're playing a game and you are developing your board. That is huge in Hearthstone. That's the first thing you can be doing. The opening of the game, and as you continue to both create your board and diminish your opponent's board. The second one is parity, when you and your opponent are kind of on the same page and both have some minions on the board and kind of have equal amounts of cards. What are cards that can help you pull ahead in the game? The third one is a card good when you're ahead in the game. And then the fourth one is, will a certain card be good if you're behind in the game? You know, your opponent's board is full, your health is getting low. Can this card help you then? And I'll jump into a little bit more specific for each of those four.
Yeah. This is a good way to look at cards. I know this way of looking at cards has become a little more popular. I see it popping all the time in Reddit, especially when new expansions are coming out. So I know a lot of people are thinking in terms of the quadrant theory, and it's a good way to look at new cards, especially when you have not place tested them, because it's a good exercise to make you think about different scenarios for the card. Right. And one thing to keep in mind is that for a card to be good, it doesn't have to be good in all of the quadrants, right? No. But the more quadrants it is good at, obviously, the more well-rounded it's going to be.
Exactly. And shout out to Limited Resources, which is a Magic podcast where I first heard of this theory, and they have a whole hour and a half episode on it. You guys can look up if you want to go more in depth. Great podcast, very strategic. It is Magic focused, but you can apply almost any of their concepts to Hearthstone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously some of the cards you might not understand and stuff, but the general concepts are completely translatable.
Exactly. All right, so I'm going to run us through a card through the quadrant theory. Let's select a card for me, Andres. It could be an old card or something, but what's a card?
Ooh. Well, how about we do one of the new cards?
Okay. Good idea.
Let's do the Explorer's Hat.
Oh, gosh. So the Explorer's Hat. Why don't you read that off? What the stats of that card?
All right, the Explorer's Hat. 2 mana. It's a spell card. Give a minion +1/+1 and Death Rattle. Add an Explorer's Hat to your hand.
All right, so let's look at this. Opening and development. Is it good at getting your board established or limiting your enemy's board? This is the idea of, it can go anywhere from turn 1 to 8, or more like turn 1 to 5, I'd say typically. It's when you're really, playing on tempo, you're playing your 2-drop, your 3-drop, your 4-drop. And sometimes with some decks, you're playing efficient removal. You're hitting a Frostbolt to take out a minion while building your own board. You're hitting Sorcerer's Apprentice and going into Flame Cannon and, mana efficiently getting minions on your field while reducing your opponent. So it's that idea of getting ahead on board state. This card, the idea of paying 2 mana to give something +1/+1, probably really bad for development. That's not an efficient use of mana.
Yeah, especially early on. The hat definitely does not help you develop any minions. You actually have to have minions to make the hat useful at all. So in this quadrant, the hat kind of falls short.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. The best thing you could do is you could play a minion on turn 1, they play a minion on turn 1, you play the hat in your minion and remove their minion. It's possible, but very unlikely that's going to work out.
Yeah, but basically in opening and developing, where you're thinking about this quadrant, you're thinking about cards that can help you push the game forward, right? They're going to put creatures on your board, they're going to put threats that your opponent is going to have to answer. There's also spells out there who do both. For example, Implosion is a great example of a spell that deals damage and develops your board.
Yep, Implosion is amazing. Stuff like Shielded Minibot and Tornasis Aspirant are great. And even
Paladin Shredder, things that are sticky are great in this quadrant.
Exactly. All right, the second one is parity. This one is interesting to me because I don't honestly think it's as important in Hearthstone as it is in Magic. Quickly to go over the rules of Magic. In Magic, when you attack with minions, instead of being able to attack specific minions, basically all of your minions automatically attack your opponent's face, and then your opponent chooses which minions they want to block with. So the reason that this is different in Magic is you can get to the point where you have a stalemate, where people are playing a bunch of creatures on both sides of the board, and neither of them want to attack, because that gives the other person the decision of which creatures to block with which. So basically they can choose, whoever's defending gets to choose the favorable combat for
and you're
themselves.
right. In Hearthstone, the dynamic is a little different, but I would agree that there's the concept of parity very much exists in Hearthstone.
Oh, it's there.
Because unlike Magic, where there can be a stalemate, what happens in Hearthstone is the person who has the strongest creature, the creature that finally sticks on the board, and that your opponent cannot use their creature to trade into yours, or their creatures to trade into it. That's the person who wins in parity. That's the person who suddenly can stop worrying about the board and can start going towards their opponent's face and start tilting the balance in their favor. So basically, cards in Hearthstone that can tilt parity, All right, think about if both opponents are playing efficient decks, right? They're both going to be playing a 3-2 or a 2-3 on turn 2, right? That trades with each other. Or they're going to play a 4-3 or a 3-4 on turn 3 that will trade with each other. So on, 4-5 or a 5-4 on turn 4 that would trade with each other. So basically, cards that tilt that balance and that help you stick the minion on the board while your opponent has to do more or doesn't have the answer. That's what parity brings you. So I would say, for example, the hat actually helps you quite a bit in this area because it can buff your creatures so that you come ahead.
Yeah, one big thing in parity is this idea that you've both been playing minions, you've both been developing something of a board, which can still happen in Hearthstone. Even though you can target minions with each other and it keeps typically a smaller board, you can both start building up some threats. And parity is the idea of what can break that, what can pull you ahead. Like you said, a really good minion can do that. The idea of buffing your own minions is awesome because you're able to kind of take that stalemate you had and suddenly pull ahead like with the hat, just get that little bit of buff. And at that point in the game, you have enough mana to maybe cast it 2 or 3 times in one turn if you do some trades.
Yeah, and your opponent is going to have to use extra resources to catch up. And if they don't have an efficient way to catch up, then will be able to keep developing over them. And
exactly.
The hat is actually quite interesting because I was playing it with it earlier today, and it can help you quite a bit in this area. For example, I was on turn 9. Yeah, turn 9. And I played the hat. I played Unleash the Hounds, and I got like 4 hounds, and I had the hat. And I just buffed one of my doggies, traded it in, got the hat, buffed another one, traded it in, got the hat, and buffed another one. So I got a +3/+3 with the hat. Obviously, it was a +3/+3 that costs 6 mana.
But no card loss.
No card loss. Yeah, you have to think about it as a hero power effect. So I lost no card advantage, but came ahead in stats, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Parity, I would say, is a more narrow window in Hearthstone because it more quickly, because of the targeting you have, one person comes ahead or falls behind much more quickly than in Magic, but it is still a state that a card can help you get ahead in. And I think the hat, this is probably actually a fairly strong area for it. It's okay in parity. So the next category is when you're ahead. Is a card good when you're already winning? These are the win more cards you hear so much about, like Bloodlust. You have a board full of minions, you play Bloodlust. That's amazing when you're ahead because it can sometimes close out the game in like one turn. Similarly, Savage Roar is great when you're ahead. Any direct damage spells are typically pretty good. Stuff like Fireball and Pyroblast are great because once you're ahead, you're at the point where you're like, okay, I just want to finish this game. I want to kill my opponent.
Yeah, basically, cards that are good in this quadrant, the ahead quadrant, are cards that, while you're already ahead in the game, either help you close out the game faster so that you don't run to the risk of your opponent taking back things, or cards that prevent your opponent from taking back the board.
Counterspell, Mirror Entity, to some extent.
Exactly.
Snipe,
so, like you said, any finisher, Grom, the Druid combo, Oil plus Blade Flurry, all those things that, can finish your opponent very quick are great. And talking about in terms of the hat, I think the hat is actually good while you're ahead. Because while you're ahead in the board, if you have the choice of having extra mana, right? You already have more resources than your opponent does. So you're probably at the point where you either don't want to develop extra resources that you have in your hand, and you want to protect the ones that are already in the board. The hat can take out your minions out of the range of a hero power. It can take them out of the range of Flame Strike. It can keep making them trade efficiently, right? Your damaged minion that's about to die, you buff it with a hat, you trade it up with a bigger minion, and then you still get the hat, which you can buff in another minion.
Yeah, it is decent. Especially if your opponent is starting to play, 1 minion at a time, you can use the hat to buff up minions and remove whatever they're playing while getting it back.
I think the best example of it, sorry.
Go ahead.
But the best example of it is generally in Hearthstone, when you're ahead as a class, that's when you see players use hero powers the most. Because it's a liability-free effect, right?
They don't want to commit too many cards.
Yeah, you're not spending more cards, but you have the extra mana, so you're squeezing in that sort of effect. And the hat has that same sort of effect.
That is a good point. I think where it falls a little short is if you're just trying to get him down quickly and your opponent isn't really playing something into it, it can, it's only getting you 1 damage compared to something like a Fireball or a Savage Roar or something like that. It's not finishing as much as other cards do, but it's not a bad little tool to have in your arsenal.
Yeah, I think obviously there's ranges in between these quadrants. I don't think the hat is as good as maybe as a blessing of kings would be while you're ahead.
But it's fine. It has a purpose.
But it's where it lies its strengths, I feel. When you're ahead and where you're at parity is usually where you want to see things like the hat.
And then we bring to where the hat is terrible, and that's when you're behind. This is the idea of your opponent has board control, is getting ahead on health, you need to catch up. Do you want to use 2 mana to put a +1/+1 on a creature you probably don't even have out on the field? No. That's when it's not good.
When you're behind, you definitely want minions. You want things that draw you cards. If you can do both, things like Asher Drake, where you play a body and you draw a card, those are the things that you want to see when you're behind. You want to see huge threats, Dr. Boom.
The number one thing I think you want to see when you're behind on board is AoE. Like, if you can get a Flame Strike when behind and your opponent overcommits, that can literally turn the game around.
Yeah, absolutely. Flame Strike, Equality Consecrate.
Something you have to be very careful about when behind is healing. Healing can be good when you're behind if you have a game plan to follow it up with. If you play an anti-heal bot and heal yourself because you know the next turn you're going to be able to do something else, that's great. But if you just heal yourself and don't have anything to follow it up with, that doesn't really do anything because you're dying slower. So healing can be good when behind, but it has to combo with also doing something else because in itself, it's just prolonging your death.
Just healing yourself is usually generally a bad play. Generally, when you're behind, healing is good to prevent you from dying, and it can be good when you're behind. But generally, what you want to do is develop your board, and usually when you're so behind, your opponent might feel tempted to ignore your board because it has no need. No need to mess with this, since it's going to kill you anyway. So you might want to develop your board and save the healing so that you can come back with your underdeveloped board. Yeah,
healing is much better at parity, or even when you're ahead on everything against like an aggro deck, except with the health. It can keep you in the game long enough to finish it out.
a lot of strategies to beat aggro decks is to aggressively get ahead and then heal yourself to prevent them from using those last points of damage to finish you off, while you already have a big board presence that can finish them off.
So that's the basis of Quadrant Theory. I really love it. Again, it's better at limited play because, as you saw through all of that, we weren't taking into account any other cards you had in your deck. It's really taking the card in isolation for the most part. But that's also valuable for Constructed. I mean, as important as combos are, you also need a card that stands on its own as well and, has good points to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
In itself, so.
And even the combo decks need this, like, the cards that are very well grounded. For example, Green Patron still needs Fire War Axe and Death Spite, which are cards that are very well rounded in all these areas.
Yeah, you need to think when you're looking at your deck, like, does it have cards that can open and develop? Does it have cards that will win when I'm ahead, finishers? Does it have a way for me to catch up when I'm behind? And if it doesn't, you need to start considering, why does my strategy not need those? Or, often you'll end up saying, okay, I'll put a Brawl in my Grim Patron deck so I have no way to catch up. And that sort of thing.
So basically, to conclude with the hat, what do you think about it? So definitely in opening or developing the board, I would give it a bad.
Yeah.
In parity, I would give it an average. It's decent here. In ahead, I would also give it an average because it does help you in that. And in behind, I would give it a very bad.
I would probably, in the end, rate the hat fairly lowly because I think that a 2-mana card, typically in most decks, is something you want to be good at opening and development. And the idea that it can't really do anything early in the game, it kind of hurts it a lot.
It hurts it a lot, and I would rate it at the same power level as a hero power. And you have to think about, do you want to have a card in your deck that
gives you a second hero power?
It gives you a second hero power?
That's a good way to put it. And it's like, maybe, it's almost like if you're late in the game at that point, you'd rather just draw a high main, or you'd rather draw an actual threat that you can play late game.
And also, this is when you have to start thinking in terms of, can this card unlock other synergies, or can this card be better with other things? I can think of one right off the bat, like with Lock and Load. You can do some crazy things. When a Lock and Load turn with a board can be crazy because you could cast the hat 3 times.
Yep, and that's when you start taking...
potentially, and draw 3 cards out of thin air. Obviously, we have to start looking at the likelihood of this scenario, and is it likely or not? Who knows? We would have to play test it.
Exactly. So yeah, when we're reviewing cards, we're not going to go through every single category for every single card, but you'll hear us a lot of the time saying, what are the baseline stats of the card? What is its abilities? What is its best case scenario? What are other cards that have been similar to it in the past, and how do they perform? How will it do in different formats? How will it do in different archetypes? How will it do in different decks? And then run it through the quadrant theory test, and you're getting a much broader picture of the card's potential and the ideas and theories behind the card than if you just, look at it and read it. So, yeah. That'll do it. Again, we're going to be recording right after this, we're going to be recording a card review that will be on the, card review of, I always forget the name, League of Explorers, that will be on the feed with this one, so you can check that out if you want to hear us to start reviewing cards. And we'll head into the outro now. You can find us on iTunes. We really appreciate all the iTunes reviews we have and any you'd like to give us in the future. We have a new one this week from friend of the show and common, actually like the Wednesday night game night person. He starts it early every week for me and has some pre-game hype with everyone. So big thanks to Jamie for being there every week and starting the call and all that. He sent us a review on point, 5 stars, and he writes, "That's what this podcast is, on point. The discussions bring up tons of valid points, and everyone can learn so much from it. And if a point is missed, the listener topics can cover any holes. Overall, fantastic job by everyone, and worth a listen to every Hearthstone enthusiast." So thank you very much for that, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Awesome that you've been liking the show. I'm glad that we can deliver and we can keep you listening. That makes us very happy. We're also very happy with how the new format is coming along, and we're definitely going to keep at it.
For sure. And you heard he mentioned their listener topics. Absolutely. We haven't been getting too many of those, but if you guys want to send in any listener topics, absolutely feel free to do so at our email address, hearthaholics@gmail.com, and we'll read them at the end of each show. Because we got our episodes got squished, we don't actually have next week's episode planned because we're doing 2 this week, but we'll let you know on Twitter as soon as we figure out the concept of what'll be best for us to do next week.
Yeah, absolutely. And always feel free, if you guys have a topic that you would like us to discuss in the show or hear an opinion about it, you can always write in. We'd love to hear what kind of episodes you guys would like us to do.
Next week is the first time in a long time we actually don't have something set. So send us ideas for next show. If there's something you want to hear us cover in more detail, please send us an email and we totally will see about getting it done. So you can also find us on YouTube or Facebook at Hearthaholics. And we are a member of the Whales Are Whales Network. Check out whalesorewhales.com. That's Whales, A-R-E, Whales.com. And you can find a bunch of other awesome shows like this with other awesome people like us. We run a game night for fellow Hearthstone podcast, The Angry Chicken. You can go to the subreddit /TAC podcast and you'll find sticky threads for the Wednesday night game night at 8 p.m. Central Daily Time, or Standard Time now, because Daylight Saving Time is over. Central Standard Time. I run that. It's mostly tavern brawls. And, this is actually really fun with Ragnaros and Nefarian coming out again. Lots of wild magic everywhere. They actually tweaked it some since last time, which I thought was really interesting.
Awesome.
They buffed Ragnaros quite a bit, so that was cool. And then we also had the Monday night game nights, which is more competitive game nights that Andres runs. Yeah, and you guys have been doing that ATLC format for a while, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's worked out so far. Usually we get 2 teams going on, and we just battle it out. We do kind of like a conquest style thing. We separate into 2 calls, and we get to go at it. It's pretty cool because you get to strategize with other people. Some people get to learn a lot of things. Some other people get to share their knowledge. So, it's a little bit of everything.
It's actually a really cool idea because it gives you an into tournament play without just having to, enter a tournament and be on your own. There are people there that are talking through your plays with you. So if you want an introduction to what it's like to play in tournaments while having a supportive group actually going through your turns with you.
Yeah, and you get to talk about the strategy with the other people, from the deck selection to what decks should everybody bring, who should be paired up with who should go first, who should go last.
Yeah.
It's very cool. And then we have this little tournament spreadsheet that everyone has access to, and we can keep the tally of the scores. And it gets pretty competitive. Everyone starts writing little comments in it. They're like, "Woo, yeah, the priest is the best," or
No, priest is never the best.
Yeah, it's never the best actually. We haven't had a priest in the tournament in a while actually.
Oh, I need to join and bring Dragon Priest.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Also, you can find us on Twitter. Andres is I Play Games. That's IPLAI Games. I am Lord Meldor, LORDMELDORR. And you can find Andres' music production company, Massive Music, at massivemusic.com, MASSEVE music.com. He did our intro music, which, as you can tell and are about to hear, is amazing. And you can find other of his stuff there. So that'll be everything, actually. So
yeah, check it out and definitely stay tuned. We're gonna do our card reviews. It'll be released simultaneously with this episode. Yep, stay tuned.
All right, everyone. Bye-bye.
Let the hunt begin.